The sun shone brightly over Earth as the world's most skilled diplomats prepared for the most important mission of their careers. For years, tensions had been rising between Earth and the Xinthar, an alien species known for their incredible technological advancements. The threat of war hung over humanity like a dark cloud. The diplomats were confident they could solve the crisis peacefully, bringing Earth's long-standing enemies to the negotiating table. They gathered in the United Nations headquarters, where high-ranking officials and ambassadors stood with anxious expressions. These diplomats were the best of the best, trained in the art of negotiation, compromise, and peace-building. They were ready to go to the Xinthar homeworld and convince their leaders to put aside their hostility and find common ground. "Today we make history," one diplomat said, checking the folder of documents containing their proposed terms. "We'll show the galaxy that Earth is a peaceful planet, capable of diplomacy and cooperation." As the diplomats boarded their sleek spacecraft, they could feel the weight of the mission on their shoulders. Earth's future depended on their success. The long flight to the Xinthar homeworld was tense, the diplomats running through their speeches and strategies in their minds. They had prepared for everything, or so they thought. Upon arriving at the Xinthar planet, the diplomats were met with a grand welcome. The Xinthar had long been a powerful species, and they had a complex history with Earth. However, recent events had pushed them to the brink of war. As the diplomats stepped out of their shuttle, they were greeted by Xinthar officials, tall humanoid beings with shimmering blue skin and large dark eyes that seemed to pierce through them. "We welcome you to our world, Earth's representatives," said the Xinthar leader, his voice cold and commanding. "Let us hear your message." The diplomats, dressed in their finest attire, stepped forward, ready to deliver the carefully prepared speech. The atmosphere was formal, respectful, yet there was an underlying tension, as though both sides were waiting for the other to make a move. But something unexpected happened. From the shadows of the Xinthar's grand palace, a group of humans appeared. They were dressed in sharp corporate suits, their faces unreadable, their posture confident. The diplomats were taken aback. These were not the representatives they had expected to meet. The humans' attire was unlike anything the diplomats had worn. It screamed authority and power, not diplomacy. They had expected to meet Earth's finest minds, but instead they saw something entirely different. The leader of the corporate-clad humans stepped forward. His eyes scanned the Xinthar, calculating, cold. He wasn't just another diplomat. He was something much more. "I'm in charge here," he said with an air of dominance, his voice echoing in the tense silence. "The diplomats you've been expecting, they're just a front. We're the real negotiators." The Xinthar leaders exchanged confused glances, unsure of how to respond to this new development. The diplomats stood frozen, unsure of what to do. The corporate humans didn't fit the mold of what they had prepared for, and this shift in expectations made them uneasy. "I assume you're confused," the leader of the corporate humans continued. "Let me make this clear. You're not dealing with negotiators in suits and ties today. You're dealing with apex predators in corporate uniforms. If you want peace, you'll have to face us." The Xinthar seemed to bristle at the statement, their calm exterior cracking. The power in the air was palpable. The diplomats, for all their years of training, had never encountered anything like this. This wasn't diplomacy. This wasn't negotiation. This was something else entirely. The Xinthar leader stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he took in the humans before him. "Who are you? What is this trickery?" he demanded. The human leader smiled coldly, his hands clasped behind his back. "No trickery, just business. And we're here to get results." The Xinthar began to murmur among themselves, their expressions shifting from confusion to suspicion. The humans in corporate suits stood firm, showing no signs of fear. It was clear that this was a power play, not a diplomatic mission. One of the Xinthar officials, a tall figure with silver hair, stepped forward. "You've come here with no honor, no respect for our customs. You will find no place for your demands here." The human leader didn't flinch. "Honor?" he said, his voice cutting through the air. "Honor means nothing when you're facing the strongest force in the galaxy. We are the ones who hold power now. You'll do things our way, or not at all. The tension in the room was suffocating. The diplomats could only watch as the situation quickly spiraled out of their control. This was no longer about peace. It was about survival. The Zinthar stared at the humans, their thoughts racing. They had never dealt with an opponent like this, one who seemed to have no fear, no respect for their power or traditions. And in that moment, the true nature of humanity's strength began to show itself. The diplomats had underestimated the true power of Earth. As the negotiations began, one thing became clear. Earth had sent not diplomats, but the apex predators, and they were here to dominate. And the Zinthar had no idea what was coming. The room was thick with tension, and the Zinthar leaders were unsure how to react to the humans in corporate suits. There was something unsettling about the way they carried themselves, unshaken, almost, too calm. The human leader, his sharp suit fitting perfectly, surveyed the room with an air of authority that sent ripples of unease through the Zinthar delegation. "We've come to discuss the future of Earth and your empire, Shinthar," the human leader said, his voice dripping with controlled confidence. "But we're not here to beg for peace. We're here to offer you a choice. Submit to us, or face total annihilation." The room went silent. The Zinthar couldn't believe their ears. They had expected diplomacy, negotiations for a mutual future. Instead, the humans were speaking the language of dominance. This was not a peaceful mission. It was an ultimatum. "You speak as if we are your equals," the Zinthar leader, still composed, said. "You think you can come here and dictate terms to us? We have crushed civilizations far more powerful than yours." The human leader's lips curled into a cold smile. "You misunderstand," he replied. "We're not equals. We are superior. And you're about to learn why." The Zinthar were not accustomed to such arrogance. They had always been the ones to hold the upper hand in negotiations, using their advanced technology and unshakable resolve to bend others to their will. But this was different. There was something unsettlingly calm about the humans in suits. Their demeanor was not that of mere diplomats. They were predators, and their presence seemed to confirm the rumors that had circulated about Earth's true capabilities. As the tension thickened, the human leader snapped his fingers, and one of his companions stepped forward, holding a small cylindrical device. He placed it on the table in front of the Zinthar leader, who eyed it cautiously. "What's this?" the Zinthar leader asked, his voice barely concealing his suspicion. The human leader leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving the Zinthar leader's eyes. "That," he said slowly, "is a prototype of Earth's new weapon. A weapon designed to wipe out fleets in the blink of an eye. It's not something we're willing to use lightly, but make no mistake, we will use it if necessary." The Zinthar exchanged uncertain glances. They had always prided themselves on their technological prowess, but this was something they had never seen before. The device on the table hummed quietly, and the Zinthar leader couldn't help but feel a wave of unease wash over him. He wasn't just facing a force of military might, he was facing something more. These humans were not bluffing. The quiet confidence in their eyes spoke volumes. "We've been observing you for a long time, Zinthar," the human leader continued, his voice lowering, becoming even more chilling. "You think you've been in control, that your power and technology make you invincible. But we've learned from your every move, your every strategy, and now we've developed weapons to match yours and surpass them." The room grew colder. The Zinthar leader could feel the weight of the human leader's words sinking in. This was no longer just a negotiation. This was a challenge to their very existence. One of the Zinthar officials, a young but sharp-eyed strategist, leaned forward. "You claim to have weapons that can match ours. But do you truly believe you can defeat us? Do you think Earth's forces, unprepared and scattered, can stand against our fleets?" The human leader smiled, and his smile was unsettling. "We're not just talking about Earth's forces. We're talking about something far greater. Something that will make your fleets look like dust." He stood up slowly, and the room watched in stunned silence as he walked over to the large display screen. With a few swift commands, The screen flickered to life, showing a series of images, vast warships, sleek and deadly, bearing the unmistakable insignia of Earth's new war machine. The Shinthar leaders stared at the images, their faces draining of color. The ships were massive, far larger and more advanced than anything they had ever encountered. These were no ordinary warships. They were designed for one thing: total destruction. These, the human leader said, turning to face them, are the future of Earth's military. We call them the Titan-class battleships, and they're already in production. Within months, they will be fully operational. The Zinthar officials stood frozen, the weight of the revelation crashing down on them. These ships weren't just a threat. They were a declaration of war, a signal that Earth was no longer a planet to be underestimated. The human leader continued, his voice colder than ever. You think you've faced Earth before? You've seen nothing. You're looking at a new Earth, a force that will not negotiate, a force that will only conquer. The room fell into stunned silence. The Zinthar leaders, who had once looked down on Earth as a fledgling species, now found themselves staring at the unthinkable. A force they could not defeat, a species that had evolved into something far beyond their expectations. The reality of the situation was clear now. Earth wasn't just sending diplomats. Earth had sent apex predators, and the Zinthar were realizing too late that they had made a terrible mistake underestimating humanity. The human leader smiled again, but this time, it was a smile that promised no mercy. Your choice is simple, he said. Bow to us or face destruction. We don't need diplomats to win this war. We have the power to end it. The air in the room was thick with tension, the silence almost unbearable. The Zinthar leaders were visibly shaken, their once steely resolve now wavering as they absorbed the weight of what the humans had just revealed. The vast warships, the Titan-class battleships, they were not just weapons. They were the embodiment of a threat they couldn't ignore. The Zinthar leader, his mind racing, was the first to speak, though his voice was unsteady. You think you can intimidate us with these ships? We've faced the might of empires far older and more powerful than yours. What makes you think your technology can outmatch ours? The human leader's eyes narrowed, his smile never faltering. It's not the technology alone, Zinthar. It's the will to use it. With a flick of his hand, the screen shifted, showing a simulation, one that was too real to ignore. The Zinthar watched as a Titan-class battleship obliterated an entire fleet of their ships in a matter of seconds. The simulation played out with brutal efficiency. Missiles launched at impossible speeds, shields that absorbed everything thrown at them, and weapons that turned their ships into nothing but space debris. The Zinthar watched in stunned silence as the simulation played out. The scale of destruction was beyond anything they had ever witnessed. Even with their advanced technology, they knew they couldn't replicate the firepower they were seeing. The sheer power of the Titan-class battleships was enough to break their entire fleet in an instant. That's the future of Earth's military, the human leader said, his voice low and confident. And it's coming for you. For a long moment there was no response from the Zinthar. The room was so quiet that even the soft hum of the starships outside seemed deafening. The Zinthar were still processing the reality of what they were facing, something far more terrifying than they had ever expected. And yet, despite the overwhelming evidence, one of the Zinthar officials, a young commander with fiery ambition, stood up and spoke, his voice shaking but determined. You're bluffing, the commander said, his voice filled with defiance. You can't possibly build such a fleet in such a short time. We've seen your kind before, all bark, no bite. The human leader's eyes flashed, his smile widening. Bluffing? He repeated, his voice growing cold. You still don't understand, do you? This isn't a bluff. This isn't a threat. This is reality, and it's time for you to face it. Without warning, the human leader pressed a button on his wrist, and the room's lights flickered. A low rumble filled the air, and before the Zinthar could comprehend what was happening, the large windows of the room slid open, revealing a sight that sent chills down their spines. A massive warship, one of the Titan-class battleships, was hovering just outside the palace. Its immense size blocked out the stars, casting a dark shadow over the entire city. It was a thing of nightmares, its hull lined with deadly weapons and advanced technology. The sight was enough to make the Zinthar leaders freeze, their minds, struggling to process the sheer scale of what they were seeing. "This is no bluff," the human leader said, stepping toward the window. "This is just the beginning. We've built a fleet like no other, and we're not afraid to use it." The Zinthar officials exchanged uneasy glances, their arrogance slowly fading. They had underestimated Earth's potential. No, they had underestimated humanity itself. They had thought of Earth as a young, fragile species, incapable of going toe-to-toe with the might of the galaxy. But now, they were faced with a force that was ready to do whatever it took to dominate. One of the Zinthar leaders, a calculating figure who had remained silent through most of the encounter, finally spoke up. "You've made your point, but what do you want from us humans? You've shown us your power. Now tell us your terms." The human leader turned back toward the Zinthar, his gaze unwavering. "We don't want terms," he said simply. "We want total submission. We want control of your planet, your resources, your fleets. You will serve Earth, or we will take everything you have." The room fell silent once again. The Zinthar, who had once looked down on humanity as nothing more than a blip in the galaxy, now found themselves staring at the harsh reality of Earth's new power. They were no longer in control. They were not the hunters. They were the prey. The human leader leaned forward, his voice lowering to a chilling whisper. "You'll bend the knee to us or we'll destroy everything you've ever known. Your people, your world, your empire. It'll all be ours." The Zinthar leaders were left with nothing to say. They had been outmaneuvered, outclassed, and outgunned. There was no negotiating. There was no peace to be had. The apex predators in corporate suits had spoken, and their words were final. The human leader turned and walked toward the exit, his back to the Zinthar. "Think it over. But know this, you don't have much time." As he left, the doors closed behind him with a finality that echoed in the minds of the Zinthar leaders. The game had changed. Earth was no longer a planet to be dismissed. It was a force to be reckoned with, and the Zinthar were about to learn just how true that was. The following hours felt like days for the Zinthar leaders. They had retreated to their private chambers, where the weight of the humans' ultimatum pressed on them like an unrelenting storm. The once proud alien species, masters of the galaxy, now found themselves at the mercy of a species they had long regarded as beneath them. The Titan-class battleships, sleek, deadly, and ominous, hovered just outside their capital, a constant reminder of humanity's newfound might. As the Zinthar gathered around a massive table, their discussions were heated, filled with frustration, anger, and confusion. There was no denying it anymore. Earth's power was real. The humans were not here to negotiate, nor were they interested in peace. They were here to conquer, and they were making no effort to hide it. "We can't let them have our planet," said the Zinthar High General, a battle-hardened leader whose armor had seen countless battles. "If we submit, we'll be nothing but slaves to these humans. Our way of life, our empire, everything we've built, it'll be destroyed." "But if we resist," said another, the fear in his voice palpable, "what choice do we have? Their fleet will destroy us before we can even put up a fight. The Titan-class battleships are beyond anything we've ever faced." The room fell silent as the weight of their predicament sank in. The Zinthar were not accustomed to backing down. They had always been the ones to dictate terms, to hold power over others. And now, they were the ones forced to choose between total annihilation or submitting to the humans who had come dressed not in military uniforms but in corporate suits. The Zinthar leader, the one who had once been confident and unshaken, stood at the head of the table, his gaze distant. He was deep in thought, weighing their options. There was a pride that burned in his chest, pride in their history, their strength, their legacy. And yet that pride was now a double-edged sword. Would they die fighting to preserve it, or would they bow to the humans and protect their people? Silence hung in the air, broken only by the soft hum of the machinery outside the palace walls. The leader's fingers drummed on the table as he weighed the possible consequences. "We will not surrender," he finally said, his voice hard. "We are Xinthar. We do not bow to anyone. We fight." The room erupted into a chorus of agreement, the Xinthar rallying behind their leader's defiance. They had decided. Resistance was the only option. They would fight the humans, even if it meant their destruction. They would never kneel. But even as the words left his lips, the leader knew how dangerous their decision was. The humans had not just shown their weapons, they had demonstrated their will. They had shown no hesitation, no mercy. They were not like any enemy the Xinthar had ever faced. They were ruthless, efficient, and driven. And if the Xinthar underestimated them now, they would be making a fatal mistake. "Prepare the fleet," the Xinthar leader ordered, his voice filled with resolve. "We will face them head-on. Let the humans see what true power looks like." The Xinthar generals scrambled to organize their forces, each aware that their fleet, though powerful, was no match for the new enemy they faced. They had always relied on their technology, their mastery of space warfare, but these humans were different. They had no fear, they had no hesitation, and worst of all, they had the resolve to use their power without remorse. As the Xinthar prepared for battle, the human fleet continued to loom in the sky above them. The Titan-class battleships were positioned with surgical precision, waiting for the Xinthar's next move. Every Xinthar ship that launched felt like a death sentence in the making, and yet there was no turning back now. The Xinthar fleet, now fully mobilized, launched into space. Their warships, sleek and deadly, filled the sky as they gathered in formation. The fleet moved with precision, a show of strength meant to intimidate. The Xinthar leader watched from his flagship, his fingers tightening around the command console. He knew they had to strike quickly before the humans had the chance to strike first. As they moved into position, the Xinthar leader's thoughts were a storm of uncertainty. Was it too late to turn back? Had they miscalculated? The Titan-class ships hung just beyond the horizon of their fleet, their presence a constant reminder of the power they were up against. They had underestimated the humans, and now they would pay the price. "We won't let them take our planet," the leader muttered to himself, his eyes locked on the vast expanse of stars before him. "We will fight. We will show them what Xinthar are capable of." And then, as if in response to his words, the Titan-class battleships fired. The first shot tore through the Xinthar fleet with a precision that was almost surgical. There was no warning, no time to react, just a flash of light and the sudden, brutal destruction of an entire battle cruiser. The Xinthar ships scattered in every direction, trying to regroup, trying to escape the relentless onslaught. But it was no use. The humans were already one step ahead. The Xinthar leader watched in disbelief as his fleet was dismantled, one ship at a time. The Titan-class battleships fired with pinpoint accuracy, turning entire sections of the fleet into glowing debris. The human forces didn't just overpower the Xinthar, they overwhelmed them with a terrifying efficiency that left no room for counterattack. "Retreat!" the Xinthar leader barked, but it was too late. The humans had already cut off their escape routes. The Xinthar fleet, once the pride of the galaxy, was falling apart before their eyes. The humans had proven their point. They were not to be challenged. As the leader watched the destruction unfold, a single horrifying realization hit him. They were not just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting to preserve whatever dignity they had left, but with every passing second that dignity seemed further and further out of reach. The silence that followed the battle was deafening. The Xinthar fleet had been obliterated, their pride and power shattered in the blink of an eye. The once mighty ships that had filled the skies now floated as wreckage in the void of space, the remains of a civilization that had believed itself invincible. On the surface of the Xinthar homeworld, the mood was one of stunned disbelief. Their military leaders, their generals, their warriors, all had been humbled by a force they never saw coming. Earth, the planet they had once considered insignificant, had brought them to their knees in a matter of hours. The apex predators, in corporate suits, had proven their power, and the Xinthar had nothing left but the ashes of their fleet. In the grand palace of the Synthar capital, the leader who had once stood with pride now stood alone. His hands were trembling and the weight of their defeat hung over him like an anchor. The human fleet, now in full control of the skies above the planet, loomed like a dark shadow over everything they had ever known. The Synthar leader's mind raced as he looked out over the destruction. He had led his people to war, thinking they would emerge victorious, but now there was nothing left to fight for. The humans had proven that they were not just another species to conquer. They were a force unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. How did it come to this? The leader whispered to himself. He had spent his life leading the Synthar, conquering planets, defeating enemies. But this had been different. They had underestimated the humans, and now their entire existence was on the line. A quiet knock on the door broke his thoughts. The door slid open, and a lone figure entered. A young Synthar officer, his uniform scorched and torn from the battle. His face was grim, his eyes filled with sorrow. "The fleet is lost," the officer said softly. "There's nothing left to salvage." The leader nodded, his voice hollow. "I know. The humans, they've destroyed us. Our fleet is gone, our power is broken, we failed." The officer stood in silence for a moment, then spoke again, his voice laced with bitterness. "They made us look weak. We gave them everything, our pride, our arrogance, and now they hold our fate in their hands." The leader's gaze darkened as he turned away from the officer. "They were right," he muttered. "We were arrogant. We thought we could control everything, that we were untouchable. But they, those humans in suits, showed us how wrong we were." As the officer looked, on the leader's shoulders slumped, the weight of their defeat finally sinking in. There would be no escape. There would be no victory. The humans had taken everything, but as the officer prepared to leave, the leader raised a hand, signaling for him to stay. "Wait," the leader said, his voice a whisper of resolve. "There's one thing we haven't lost yet." The officer looked at him, confusion flickering in his eyes. "What do you mean, sir?" The leader turned back to the window, staring out into the sky where the human fleet still hovered. "We may have lost our fleet, our cities, our pride, but we haven't lost the will to fight. Not yet." For the first time in what seemed like hours, a small spark of defiance flickered in the leader's eyes. The Synthar had been broken, yes, but they were not defeated in spirit. Their pride may have been shattered, but they still had something left to fight for. Their survival. The officer took a cautious step forward. "You want to fight them again? With what? We have nothing left." "We still have our people," the leader replied, his tone hardening. "And we have the galaxy. We may not be able to defeat them with military might, but we can still make them understand. They may have destroyed our fleets, but they haven't destroyed our will. We can find another way." The officer seemed unsure, but he nodded slowly, his loyalty to his leader stronger than his doubts. "What do you propose?" The leader's eyes gleamed with a new, dangerous resolve. "We'll build an alliance. We'll unite the other species, those who still oppose Earth's dominance. They may have taken our fleet, but they haven't taken our alliances. We may be broken, but we're not finished. Not yet." The officer looked skeptical, but there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. The humans had taken their pride, their ships, and their empire, but they hadn't taken their determination to survive. The Synthar leader was right. There was still a chance. A slim one, but it was there. As the officer left, the leader stood alone, staring out into the sky where Earth's fleet loomed overhead. The galaxy was changing, and it was clear that Earth was at the center of that change. The humans had demonstrated their power, and there was no denying it. They were the new rulers of the galaxy. But the Synthar would not submit forever. They would rise again. The leader knew that Earth had underestimated one thing: the resilience of those they sought to conquer. The Synthar may have lost the battle, but they were not done yet. The war was far from over, and in the depths of the Synthar homeworld, A new plan began to take shape. It was not one of war, but of survival. For the first time in their history, the Shinthar would have to play a new game, one where diplomacy and cunning would be just as important as firepower. The fate of the galaxy had shifted, and the Zinthar would not go quietly into the night.